Hi. So you gotta love overhead fluorescent lighting. It's great. I would like to talk today about it's Music Monday, and I would like to talk about resonance. I'd like to talk about sympathetic resonance to be exact, and how that applies to registration. So, we often talk about chest voice, middle voice, or mixed voice, and head voice and whistle register. But today we're going to talk about just the three: head voice, middle voice, and chest voice. And a lot of students and people are under the impression that those are actual things that happen within the larynx themselves, that the larynx changes in some way or uh, switches over in some physical way. And it actually doesn't. And it is because it is an acoustical phenomenon. And I want to talk about that a little bit. A lot of people don't understand how the voice works in terms of what makes it vibrate, what makes the resonance occur, and why we feel those things in those ways. So, to clear up any myths, I want to talk briefly about that. Chest voice, and the reason we call it chest voice is it is usually related to speech. I tend to talk up here a little bit because I'm a certain kind of soprano that does that, but occasionally I will talk here and I can really feel that rumble in my chest. If you have a lower voice, you might feel that. Sometimes when I sing in a different style besides classical, I can feel that right here. And that I feel here, and that's why we call it chest voice. Well, what's happening when I do that? First of all, let's talk about a piano. The piano, and every instrument actually has a power source, and this is based on acoustical science. I'm not making this up. Has a power source, a vibratory response, and uh, and then a reaction to sound and air molecules, right? Air molecules into the perceiver's ear, which makes the eardrum vibrate. So the piano, let's take the piano for instance. The piano, the power source is when those hammers hit the strings. And then there has to be a vibratory response to that. And the vibratory response is the strings themselves, right? They vibrate, and depending on the pitch, they vibrate so many times per second. Then once that vibration occurs on a small scale, it actually happens on a larger scale when it hits the wood of the piano. Now I'm being really basic here because I don't want to confuse people, and I just really want you to understand the basics of resonance. So the power source is the hammer. The vibratory or vibration that occurs because the hammer hits it is the string that vibrates. And then the sympathetic resonance that enhances that sound and amplifies it is the wood on the piano. Okay, so my instrument is the same. When I sing, air is my power source. When I blow air out, I'm not intentionally doing that. Speech or phonation, singing, is an involuntary response. I don't have to tell my chords or think about my chords moving together and coming together in a way. It is what we would call an involuntary response. It's neurological. So uh, sometimes when I go, achoo, I'm not planning on that. It just happens, right? Although some people don't phonate when they sneeze, but that's not me. I do, and I always have. But it's not something I'm consciously trying to do. Now, I can bring something like that to the conscious, and in that way it becomes voluntary. And certainly, when I am singing, or I intend to sing, or I intend to speak, and I want to speak in a certain way or in a low part, I'm taking that involuntary moment and turning it into a voluntary moment. So when I blow air, it expels out of my body and through the vocal folds, right? And it makes them vibrate. And because speech and singing is involuntary, the muscles and ligatures come together and make the vocal folds come together, and they vibrate because of that air that's passing through. And as I think about pitch or not think about pitch, it's also an involuntary thing. When I purposely bring it to the forefront and I want to think about singing, ah, my folds then become vibratory at a certain rate per second, which makes, say, A440. That's A440. My vocal folds are vibrating at 440 times per second. So then what happens is I get this pharyngeal space becomes the enhancer. I sympathetically resonate, and my chest sympathetically resonates in the low end of the vibratory response of my folds. I can feel that resonance here. Ah, but if I go so high, I have to get out of that. And no, my larynx is not changing or doing something strange, right? My vocal folds may be stretching and getting thinner for higher pitch, but it is not suddenly changing position or something is not. I hear people say things like, well, I think my larynx is clicking. It's not really that. It is really an acoustical phenomenon. So when that happens, then my larynx, being the tube of resonance, suddenly resonates or sympathetically resonates in here. And that's why we call it middle voice. And I can enhance my speech and really feel that right in here or around the back of my molars. Everyone will feel it in a very different place. I feel it a little in my nose, but that's partly because of the place that I'm from. It can be very regional. And that is where I have the sympathetic resonance for that part of my entire instrument. So I'm feeling those vibratory responses, and those vibratory responses are very efficient, which is why when I try to sing in chest voice really high, it doesn't work so well. Or when I try to sing in my head voice on a low pitch, it doesn't work well either. It becomes very inefficient. So as I then increase my pitch and my vocal folds in this way change, and they become thinner and they stretch just like a rubber band when you want to have pitch. Yes. To that, you'll stretch it tighter and longer, and it makes higher pitch. And that way, my voice is changing, but the resonance chamber doesn't click over or turn over. There's not something happening in that regard. As I keep saying, it's an acoustical phenomenon. So once I get out of this area that I feel the sympathetic resonance in, then I might feel that sympathetic resonance here in my sinus cavities and what people often call the mask, or some people feel it in the top of the head, and a lot of teachers will talk about singing as if you have a hole in the top of the head. So if you're using imagery in that way, that may be what you feel, but we tend to lose really strong sense of an involuntary or sympathetic resonance when we sing in our head. Ooh! I mean, I feel that, a little here, maybe in the top of my teeth, but I don't feel it in my head. You know what I mean? So, Oh! A lot of singers talk about the hook, where you start in chest voice. Oh! And they literally say that they feel a hook that occurs. So, I hope this clears up some things for you. If you have questions, please ask it on the Facebook page, and I'll be glad to answer or direct you to other people who are more experts in this than I am, and who have studied a lot about acoustical sound in terms of singing and acoustics in singing. And I find it super fascinating, and I try to use it to make my voice as efficient as possible, and I want to help my students use it to make their voices as efficient as possible as well. So if you have questions, feel free to ask. It's always great to have a good dialogue about vocal technique. You learn a lot when you talk to other people, and I always learn a lot when I talk to my students. So ask questions. Bye. See you next Monday.